In this video, we're going to analyze the second movement of the Mozart Piano Sonata Kochel 331, and this is an example of minuet and trio, and has lots and lots of classical characteristics. So if you'll go to the website, and if you will go over to the tab that has the handouts and scores, and then go down to minuet and trio, and then you'll be able to find scores for minuet and scherzo and trio movements. Click on that, and then you will see the complete Mozart piano sonatas are loaded onto the website. And what you'll want to do is to go to page 116 out of 313 pages on this PDF score. So if you'll do that right now and then follow along with this score as we work our way through the form of this movement. All right, so there are certain things that I already talked about that you look for in a minuet and trio movement by a classical composer like Mozart, Haydn, or Beethoven. And so one of those things is just to look at the meter. And so here we have 3/4. This is in the key of A major. He writes there minuetto. Typically that will be indicated at the beginning, so you can't miss as far as what the overall expected form is going to be. And so you want to, first of all, look for the sense of contrast between the minuet and the trio. So one thing that you would know with that minuet is that it's going to be a moderate tempo, something here the editor recommends 1/16 for the quarter note, which is a moderate tempo. And then if you'll go to the third page, you'll see then the word trio. And the things that you're looking for is that element of contrast. So what is that element of contrast between the minuet and the trio? So in this particular case, we said the minuet was in A major, and if it doesn't have a contrast of texture, like this one doesn't have a tremendous amount of contrast with the texture, and so you're going to look for different things. In this, we're going to have this contrasting element in the trio section where the right hand plays the main theme, and then the left hand crosses over. You see that happening in the fourth measure of the trio, and plays what you heard in the right hand 2 measures earlier. And the left hand is going to be going back and forth between the bass and then crossing over and imitating the right hand 2 measures earlier. And so that is a contrasting element that you don't have in the minuet. But you can look for things like that the composer is going to do to get a little bit of variety. So you always look for the contrast of key. So in this particular example, the overall key is A major, and then in the trio section it shifts to the subdominant key of D major. And that's a typical key for the trio for Mozart. And so that is not unusual at all. And so you have those elements of contrasting key, and you're also looking for contrasting thematic material. So those will be things that you look for: key, texture, thematic material. Those 3 things that I mentioned previously. All right, then you are looking to see, does the composer use a da capo at the end of the trio section? And in this particular movement, he does. And so you see that at the very bottom of the fourth page, the end of the trio section, he has minuetto, D, C. And so that's going to indicate that you go back and you replay the minuet, and then you don't take repeats on the da capo. All right. Now, if the composer doesn't do that and doesn't have a da capo, then you want to ask yourself the question, why? And so it will have to do with something that the composer is going to change on that repeat. And so a lot of times they'll change the dynamics, or they'll change something with the way it's voiced, or change the mood somehow or another. Maybe change the rhythmic structure, if it's a piano sonata, have the hands so they're alternating back and forth real fast. But look to see why the composer would go to the trouble of writing it out. All right, then you want to look at the minuet and see if it fits within the expected pattern of enlarged three-part song form, and if it uses the expected double bars and repeats. And so look for that use of double bars around part one. And you can see that in this movement there, the double bars are placed at the third measure of the fifth system. And so you have 16 measures for the first part, which is a real typical length. And so you're going to have four-measure phrasing and so forth. At this point, you're just trying to kind of scan to see what happens. At the double bars, you're expecting to see that it might modulate to the dominant key and have a cadence on that dominant key. So in A major, the dominant key is E major. And you see at that point, right there at the double bars, that it does indeed cadence on E major. The left hand is in treble clef on the downbeat, and then it goes down an octave for that E. And so clearly that's a cadence on dominant. Then after the double bars, you're going to look ahead to see if you can identify where part three would begin. So you know part two begins right after the double bars. And so you're looking for the return of the opening. And so go ahead and do that. You may have to go back and look to see how the opening began. So it started with that little arpeggiated A major triad and that rhythm there. So it starts with a half note, and then a quarter note, and then a little more animated on the second measure. And so you can see where that is, that returns on the second page, second system, fourth measure. And so that would be the expected part three. So part two is the beginning of this section after the double bars. And so it looks like you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So it looks like you have three phrases there. So that's looking like that could be a phrase group. And then you want to compare the way this comes back, and you're looking at that opening phrase to see if it's the same, which it is. And then the second phrase is where it's different. And Whereas in part one, it's going to modulate to the dominant key. Here, it doesn't do that. It stays, it's rewritten, and actually the extra measure that you have is right there on the fourth system, where it gives you that extra sequence, and that leads then to a cadence at tonic at the end of that fourth system. And then you have the last two phrases that are in A major, and the cadences on A major. So, and that's always going to cadence on tonic at the end of part three, because when that da capo occurs, then that would be the end of the movement. So, of course, it's going to cadence on tonic there. So, examine just the basic idea. Does it look like an enlarged three-part song form? Does the trio look like an enlarged three-part song form? Let's look at that real quickly. So, the third page with the trio, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then you're going to have four measures, four measures. You have a lot of repetition in the trio because of that crossing over pattern. But you do see that it cadences on A major at the double bars, so it has modulated from D major, the subdominant key, to A major, the dominant of D major. And then after the double bars, you have part two. You look ahead to see where the opening part is going to come back, and that occurs on that last page, and that is on the third system, second measure. So that then is brought back, and now instead of leading to a cadence on the dominant key, this cadence is on tonic. And so this also looks like it's enlarged three-part song form. So sometimes the trio section could be a two-part song form. Usually if there's, not enlarged three-part song form, it's going to be with the trio section. That it might be a little shorter, but anyway, this follows your basic expectations. So then what you want to do is to go through, and you've already kind of looked through it and kind of analyzed the overall parts, but so analyze the song forms. And then within each part, describe the phrase construction. Is it a parallel period? So we see at the beginning of this movement that you have a four-measure phrase that has a shifted half cadence on the second beat of measure 4. And then you have a second phrase that begins, and that second phrase has an extension in it, and that extension occurs in measures 3 and 4 of that second system, and then it has a cadence that's also shifted on tonic there at the end of the second phrase, which is that third system, second measure. All right, and then the third phrase begins with the arpeggiated, rolling that E major dominant triad. And so you have four measures there, and then you have another four measures that starts with the scale, the ascending scale material. And so there are four phrases in total, and the first and the third phrase are contrasting. So part 1 would be a contrasting double period. So you want to go through and do that with all of the parts. So within each part, And then you can look to see if there might be any kind of relationship that the composer uses. Sometimes with Beethoven, you might have a thematic idea in the scherzo that he then uses as a basic idea in the trio. You'll still have a sense of the trio section being, having different, key and different themes, but you can look for any thematic, motivic connections. In this particular example, what Mozart does at the end of part 2, just before it reaches that final dominant chord, is that he uses a German sixth chord, an augmented sixth chord. And so if you look at the spot on the second page, on the second system, where you have the scherzo on the second measure, and at that spot you're going to have in the top voice a C natural, and in the bottom voice you're going to have an F natural. On the third beat, then he's going to give you that D sharp, which in the key of A is the raised fourth step, which is an essential element of the augmented sixth harmonies. And so you know that augmented sixth between F natural and D sharp is what creates that tension to resolve by half step in opposite directions to E. So that F natural goes down a half step to E, the dominant pitch, and that D sharp goes up a half step to E, and that then is the dominant harmony, E major, so that German sixth chord or Italian or French, whichever version you have, serves as a predominant function harmony, subdominant type chord. And he uses that right there to create the greatest amount of tension harmonically before then you have a return of the opening material where part 3 begins. So I want to point that out as we listen to it. And then if you can look at the corresponding place in the trio section. So you go to the end of part 2 just before you have the return of the opening. And so on that last page, that would be the first time you hear, in the left hand you have actually all 3 tones of that Italian sixth. So that would be on the second system, on the second line, the second measure. And the left hand there has B flat, D natural, G sharp. This is in treble clef. And this is setting up the key of D minor. So at the end of part 2, we're going to hear that it shifts to some minor keys. And that then sets up a cadence on D minor and reaches that German sixth. So it's kind of ambiguous here whether the F or the E is harmonic. If the F is harmonic, then that would make it a German sixth. If the E is harmonic, that would make it a French sixth. But anyways, passing through those tones. And so that is used in the same spot in the form at the very end of part 2. That would be something that you could point out too, that unites the construction harmonically of these 2 enlarged 3-part song forms. It's the use of the German sixth just before the 5 chord at the end of part 2 in both the minuet and the trio. So one thing that you should do is just review the construction of augmented sixth chords, and because we're going to see that used in a way that relates very often to the form, and that was a harmony that created the greatest amount of tension in the classical period. It's a harmony that's new in the classical era, so you don't really have that harmony used much at all in the Baroque. You can find a few examples, but not very often, but they use it quite a bit in the classical period. And so something that you should be able to recognize quickly.